Hello. Welcome back to another episode on the Omni Channel podcast. This is audio only and another evening moment in bed. I know I could technically grab the microphone, but I feel like when the thing is happening and there's something I need to say, it's the easiest way for me to just grab my phone and record a voice memo for you. Today's episode I actually have recorded before, and the first time I attempted to record this episode, I was pacing back and forth in my bedroom, actually the living room, and it was still in formulation. And I think that's quite okay because perhaps thoughts that we want to share, it has to marinate a little bit more. Now, in today's episode, I want to talk about what I think makes someone influential. And the more I have been expressing online, and the more I have been having conversations with people, the more I have recognized the micro-influence moments. And perhaps if you are a creator yourself, this is something, or a thought leader, this is something that you have already recognized yourself. When you have something that you express or written, not just like the people who are blatantly copy what you say, but there is some degree of curation that after you had a conversation, someone goes on to create based on what you guys talked about. And this has happened to me so many times at this point that from a conversation, from a podcast episode, I can either see people are covering the topics or the realization they have gotten from the conversation, or it actually helps to set them on more of a journey that they define themselves now differently because of that. And again, to me, all is fine. We usually both walk away from the conversation learning something. So I think it's a natural way of two people thinking together, and whatever emerges, that it's natural that people run with it. But I also noticed that outside of conversations, it could be a YouTube video I posted, and then seeing that echo through my audience, that week's topic, and it doesn't matter. I think the more you do this, the more you recognize that there is that micro influence happening, because we are social creatures and we influence each other all the time. Now, what has also been true for me is that I've been contemplating what makes someone quote unquote influential. And not in a word of the influencer and the lifestyle and all of that, but what makes someone's thoughts be influential almost ripples through people, or some people start regurgitating the same words. And it's not to bash the people who do this, it's just that they are more, I guess, open to influence than other people. And we are all open to influence to certain degrees, but I think there are certain people who are more permeable to influence, so to say. So I've noticed the ripples, and obviously with the ripples, you can see similarities in language and expression, even down to sometimes like the way someone speaks is actually being taken and almost not used in a way, but it's just imitated in a way. And again, it's not negative, it's just something I observe. So as I'm having conversations with people, the way I have conversations with people, I don't just listen. To me, I try to understand at the same time. So to me, when I understand something, it means that in a way, if I understand it, I remember it. I know. Then from knowing that understanding emerges, then I get it, and I get it forever, right? So it could be an industry insight that now I understand, it becomes a part of my thinking landscape. So that when I'm listening to someone, I actually think with them many times. And perhaps this is something I picked up from interviewing people on the podcast for the past 5 years, just being not just actively listening to respond and to kind of say something back, but more so to understand. And what has been happening very naturally is that every single conversation, I not just listen to what you say, but I also find understanding in what you say. And what has been the case sometimes is that, when someone tells me, for example, a new business idea, I just met with an entrepreneur friend in person after a long time, and we sat down in a restaurant just for lunch. And this entrepreneur tells me about what is she working on and just like the details of her thinking and her plan. And I start to dig into that because I want to understand. I don't just listen because I just listen. I genuinely want to track the logic. I want to understand. And I'm checking for understanding, logic, coherence. And so what happened is in this occasion is there were just times when the thinking felt fuzzy. And when I cannot track the coherence, like the through line of the logic of the thinking of someone, I usually think to myself, maybe they just need some clarity around it. Maybe this is not something they have tested enough times, and that's okay. That's cool. It's not my job to police people's thinking or business ideas. It's just something I know to myself, and then I pull back. I don't push further. I just understand, okay, perhaps this is something that they have yet to test out, or there are just more applications or reps that they need to do, so that this becomes more crystal clear, so the next time when we have a conversation, they are able to express it with much more clarity. And that's when it clicked for me, that to me, someone has a strong influence when their thinking is solid. So in a way, when they have a certain idea or a realization that they got to, they actually can walk you through the path of how they got there, right? So, and that path is, when made visible, makes perfect sense to the listener. If you have, for example, if you have adopted an idea from someone and you know you're running with the idea and you're just repeating it because you understand what the idea means, but you haven't really lived the understanding itself, like as the idea was created and the wrestling and the path and the detours, and you don't know those pathways, but you can just grab the end of it because you understand it and it sounds cool. Sometimes it's just literally that. But to me, when someone is influential, they don't just take an idea because it sounds cool and because they understand it. They actually go through a path and embody it and just walk through it in a way that it becomes theirs. It's almost like filtered through their body. Filter is a hard word. Filtered through their nervous system and the experience, and it becomes something else. It cannot be the same thing because like we have different experiences and humans, and we have different perspectives. So it doesn't automatically become the same thing. It becomes something of a version of yourself. And to me, that's more influential when you can do that, when you can illuminate a pathway of how something came to be, when you can explain the process of how things came to be, and you have a very coherent way of thinking about it because you yourself been there when it came to existence, right? That to me is the ultimate influential way of being. And obviously there are different levels of that, because you can actually put through something in your system and cognitively understand it, and perhaps you've yet to embody it on a deeper layers because perhaps you understand it and perhaps you have a clear stance on it and you know how you got there. But there's a different level of being actually embodied in that principle and living your life when there's pressure, when there are circumstances that bring that up for you, and still acting in alignment of that principle. Now you gain a deeper level of understanding, and obviously your influence grows the more experience you've gotten, the more convicted you've gotten because you've seen it happen over and over. And another example I like to give here is how coherent thinking, just having that process of coherent thinking, like why some idea is the way it is. I like to think about it as a car engine. So a car engine has its components, and every single component is there for a reason. So if I was to pick apart a car engine and look at the individual pieces, they would all serve a purpose in the engine, and they would be there for a reason. And I can almost use the same example of someone thinking and someone's pattern of thinking, the architect of their mind and their thinking, and grab the idea or grab whatever that is that you're saying and almost dissect it piece by piece. And you can think about deconstructing an idea or almost like it's like a briefcase that someone packed perfectly, and I'm opening the briefcase and I can admire how nicely it's packed, but I'm like, okay, let me just remove the socks. Let me see what's in there. Oh, let me see what's in there. And every single item I'm removing is actually makes perfect sense, and there's that every single piece is deserved to be there for a reason. And once we can reveal that pathway, and there's such clarity in the pathway for the person on the receiving end, for the receiving end of the person, that to me is the most influential way to be. Because why? When we reveal our thinking, and actually because we lived through it, we thought through it, we formed an opinion based on our own clarity about it and coherence about it, what happens is that people can track the entire process. So every single step of the way, when we reveal the thinking, they go, that makes sense, and that makes sense, that makes sense. Yes, I get it. And even if you don't agree with the conclusion, or even if you don't agree with the idea itself at the end, you could be going like, I can see how you think that. But anyway, for me, it's this, right? A very good example could be a friend who is investing into a podcast studio that is very high tech, the first episode, he wants it to be just perfection in the way of it's the production and the lights and everything. And he could explain to me that in great details, like what makes him pick something that is high level and how he likes to do things. And I can agree with him because I as he walks me through his reasoning, yep, that makes sense, right? Even to how do they pick the studio specifically. He walks me through, I trace it back, and every single step of the way, it makes sense. At the end, I can still say, well, I could see how that's working for you. For me, I just like to grab my phone and I just like to speak. And sometimes to me, that's perfect. Like I knew I could invest in a higher tech thing. And in fact, I've been investing slowly as I was going. But to me, the most important part was, what is something I can start doing right now? And I can sustainably do it over time, and I can improve as I go. And to me, I was like, I just need to get it out there. That's all I needed to do. While I understand your thinking because you revealed to me and it makes perfect sense and good for you, I can also tell you how my thinking came to be. And you can also say, well, that's good for you, right? Because I know I have a through line in the logic of my own thinking and the coherence of my own thinking. So when that process is revealed to us, and when we go through that, even if the thing is a no, we're like, to me is this, but I get what you're saying, then the resistance is much less. And if in any or chances someone reveals their way of thinking and how they got to where they are, you actually might say, actually, that's so true for me. And okay, tell me, like, you really understand me. And so when it comes to selling, for example, many times I just reveal the pathway of how I came to create the program. What was the behind the scenes? What did I learn from the experience? And by the time I just reveal the thinking, people go, yeah, sign me up. I get it. Makes sense. I actually tried that too. And that didn't work. Oh, I'm glad you have done that. And you knew, okay, so you must know something and you must have been further on your journey. In fact, the people who came to my program, they were coming because they like, oh, I see you are still on the journey, but it seems like you're further than I am. So let me learn from you. And so when we reveal that, there isn't so much about how can I give you the features and benefits and almost the problem solution and like we're trying so hard to persuade and influence someone's decision making. It just becomes like, hey, this has been my process. If that makes sense to you too, then would love to invite you to this program. And so that also is disqualifying people in the process. So to me, the more I can dissect your thinking and the more it becomes coherent, the more you can tell me, okay, how that came to be for you, the more influential you become. And obviously with more embodiment and experience, and everything gets refined over time. But it's just not this thing that you heard and it sounded cool. It's this thing that you heard and I'm like, oh, let me see how that shows up in my life. And this is something I didn't never consciously did, that just happens all the time. I hear an idea. Life throws me situations in which the idea gets activated. And so I don't even know what was the original intent of the person who created it. I just know that this now gets illuminated in a situation that makes sense for me. And I'm going to put my own twist and interpretation on it naturally. So that even though the idea was perhaps something else that the author of the idea intended, now because it got illuminated into a real life experience of mine, it becomes mine and it becomes slightly different or maybe a different way of thinking and seeing it. And so I think that's when we are influential. And I had a podcast yesterday I recorded with someone talking about AI, and he told me that the way he was prepping for this podcast is actually very funny. Just basically chat AI, just prepping and responding to questions. So like when he gets those questions, he knows what to say, how to respond. He reduces his anxiety, and that's perfect. And I remember telling him, like, I don't prep so much to answer questions. What I do is I spend quality thinking time to understand my own stance on something and formulate that out loud enough so that when I understand why I believe that thing, it becomes interchangeable. So you can ask me a question on something and perhaps I haven't taken the time to think about that or form a belief about that that's coherent because I took the time to think through it. In that scenario, I probably wouldn't be giving you the best, most coherent answer. But if this is a question, and a lot of questions I already have stance on, a lot of things that are in circulation. I already kind of know why I think the way I think because I took time to think about it and then coherently understand that whole thing. Then when you ask me that question, I'm not making the answer up from zero. I just basically index that part of my brain that is already done with the pre-made idea because I know why I think that way. It's my idea. It's my embodied version of an idea. It can be the same thing. So I just index the understanding and I shape it and calibrate it to the speaker, right? So for example, if you ask me about what I think about service providership, then and obviously the conversation, like we are both service providers and we are in a conversation. I know what I think about service providership. I know my experience. I know how I work. I know what I liked in the industry, what I didn't like in the industry, what are different mindsets of service providers. And I can bring that insight and I can tailor that so that the listeners of the person or the person in front of me gets to understand it. I can shape that understanding in a way that they go, yep, that's relevant for them. But the understanding at its core is its core. I know why I believe that thing. So you can come and pressure test that idea. I would still know why I think that way. It doesn't mean that it's not open to different perspectives because you could tell me something and I'd be like, oh, actually, I could see how that's also valid. So I'm always open to perspectives and upgrading my way of thinking. I think it's also is mattering that you can upgrade your way of thinking if you have new evidence or new understanding. So it's not like you're rigid in the way you're thinking, but essentially you know why you think that. And so that from that point on, what has been my case in terms of how do I prep for these occasions and interviews is just simply that I know why I think that way. That's it. I thought about it. There were many, many, many occasions in which there were situations that happened and perhaps sometimes misunderstandings in business that made me reflect. And because my process is experiencing something and then going to reflecting about it, and then after that making a decision and acting, and then again something happening and reflecting, forming an opinion and almost is extracting the insight that's relevant for me. And then that's my process. So reflection is actually an active thing that I do. It could be an improv class that I went to that day and I have 600 observations of how I reacted, how someone reacted, what happened. And I spend a good 3-4 hours sometimes just reflecting out loud and processing out loud. And I store those experiences and formulate an opinion on them. And I just get that opinion, index it, and use it in context of conversations. And I have countless examples of that. It's happening all the time. That's why I like to keep my life in a way that I keep experiencing things so I can enrichen my insights and reflect on different things. And also I have friends that we can reflect out loud. So when you have intellectual friends that you can just have out loud reflections and you can send each other podcast episodes of reflection and you can go back and forth, that's the best thing. So we think together, things emerge. I love that so much. So if you can do that, that's actually so helpful as well. It can accelerate your reflection and the way you process things even more. So that's just a caveat on doing that. And another thing I wanted to say here is, and this is something I observed as well, and it's not to bash anyone, this is just an observation, is that when it comes to selling, and selling by writing or selling by speaking, that obviously is a lot of emphasis on the benefits and what you're going to get, and that's cool that you do that, and it's amazing. You're not focused on yourself, but you're focused on the other person and their outcome. It's amazing. Where now it gets fuzzy for me is when I hear someone telling a story to sell something or invite someone to something, and the story has gaps and quantum leaps. Almost like the first time I experienced it is I was listening to Mel Robbins on stage. And she basically, they had a huge bed they brought to the set, and it was illustrating how she was in bed and basically depressed, and she made up the 5-second rule and she launched out of bed, and that changed her life. And somehow we jumped from her showing her cringy Instagram profile when literally she had no followers, only friends who liked her stuff, into hyper jumping into who she is today. And so even though that sounds like a cool story, there's a massive quantum leap. So what we don't talk about is the amount of work and effort that this required. But to me, that's not a way of thinking I can track. So we jump from this one thing to now we are famous, and the in between is like completely dark. And somehow I should believe now that you have been possessing the solution, because reality is much more messy. And I'm not saying that you should disclose every single detour, even though if you can disclose and illuminate the path that led you to an understanding, an idea, or even something that you're selling, the more you can do this, the better. But also, I just feel like I don't buy it. And I had a conversation with one of my thinking friends about how there are different levels of awareness for people in terms of what they buy into, right? Like some people buy into get rich quick or get freedom and financial freedom, right? There are people who buy into that without questioning how it's done. Like the idea itself is enticing enough. And there are more discerning buyers the higher we go. And I think because I've over time became more discerning, I require more evidence. And I think there is a such thing we call buyer sophistication. So it means that there are more and more people who are getting almost desensitized by messages that are full of gaps and quantum leaps and like, oh, here we are. Now we are here, right? And they go, okay, I don't know why. And sometimes they don't know why. Many times they're just like, I don't know why. I just don't feel this. Like there's something off. I just feel resistance. I don't think it's for me. I can't explain. There's a lot of that too when it comes to buying or investing into something now. There's just something off. You can't quite tell why. But I think many times it's because that process of understanding or how something came to be is just not revealed. There's just quantum leaps. If there are quantum leaps, sometimes there is full-on deception, which obviously is not the best practice. But I think a sophisticated buyer is asking the questions of, okay, what's the profit on that? Like, what's the net on that? Like, okay, you said you made this much. Okay, how much the cost is for you every month? Like, how much does it take for you to run a company like that? How much are you investing into ads? Like, obviously, more sophisticated buyers are not just gonna look at the number and be like, whoa, that's such a big number. They gotta be like, okay, so do tell me how that came to be. How much are you gonna take home on that? And now we're talking. Now I'm interested, right? So I think those are the questions that now, especially as people are getting more and more sophisticated, and if your buyers are sophisticated, then you might be also implementing more of that into the way you are showing up. But to me, that coherence in thinking is ultimately that, and that you know why you say it, you've been through it, is what ultimately is creating, I think, a very, very strong influence, actually. And so there's one more thing I want to add here before I let you go. It's a very interesting thing that happened on improv class. And I'll tell you this story. We'll end up the conversation and wrap up the conversation with this one. But basically what happened in improv is we had an exercise in which we had to say a random childhood fact about us. We have to put in a piece of paper the teacher was reading out loud, and 3 of us need to volunteer. And obviously the story belongs to only one of us, and 2 of us had to kind of make it up and lie. And the whole idea was behind it is that the audience at the end needs to decide what story belonged to who and who was lying. This was such a fascinating exercise. First of all, I cannot lie. Like, to me, lying makes me anxious. Like, I can't. Lying is so hard for me. You know, the card games when you have to lie, I can't. My poker face is non-existent. Like, I smile. Like, there's no way I can just hide that. Unless I'm thinking to something terrible. Then I'm like, okay, maybe I can shut it down so you can't see my emotions. But what happened is that, interestingly, the participants, when it came to stories, in order to avoid flat-out lying, they actually had raised their hands for stories that they already kind of have versions of that. So instead of raising their hands for things that are blatant lies and they would have to make up something and come and lie about it, most of them came for a variation of the same story. So, for example, it was a story of someone who went to watch a play when they were young. And the 2 other person, like, we also went to watch a play when we were young. We just didn't go to this place. We went to another place. But so they could both speak with conviction in a way because they had a similar experience. and perhaps omitting those details, but it was really hard to tell them apart, right? Because, oh wait, it sounded like you also had it. And most people were like, yeah, I actually had something like that, quite similar, so of course you raise your hands for that. But another interesting thing happened as well, and I'll tell you this and how we could detect that someone was lying. My story that I've written for the piece of paper is that I could never win at chess. And it was true. I could never win at chess, no matter how hard I tried. And, two other people came to kind of raise their hands. And one guy said, I went to a chess club and I've been practicing chess and somehow I could never win. And no one was buying that. If you went to a chess club and you're like a nerd, there's no way you haven't won once and you're here talking about it on stage. And my explanation was quite simple. I'll tell you what I said. I said, so when I was younger, my grandpa tried to teach me how to play chess. And I don't know why, but I could just never beat him. And I was getting frustrated and I lost within the first couple of steps and it was just done. And after that, just remember being in primary school in the library and just wanting to play chess with kids and they always beat me. I could never win. Maybe get into a tie at some point and just give up. And I'm like, man, I can't win. And then after that, just playing with my partner and I could just never win. So honestly, I kind of thought to myself that perhaps it's just I can't think that many moves ahead and perhaps chess is just not for me. That was my story. Now, look at the story itself. There are a lot of the parts of the story that go, like, I don't know why I couldn't win. I don't know what happened, but it's just that's what happened. And you could argue that, well, I cannot externalize the entire step because in this scenario, I don't know why. I just know I could never win, and I think perhaps because I can't think that many steps ahead of time. And you could argue that it was more believable, and by the way, everyone immediately was like, yep, you are the one with the story. Not because it was more believable. I literally said, I don't know why I couldn't win, but because it was more believable in how human reality is messy. Like sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes just like, well, I thought about that and I couldn't figure it out. And that is much more believable than to say, well, this is exactly how it is, and now I realize this. Like, do you see how there are nuances in our thinking? It's not just that you know why you think what you think, but sometimes you know why you don't know. And you can say, well, I don't know this one. I have no idea why. Perhaps you can just say, like, maybe it's this, but maybe that. I don't know. But that was enough for people to be like, yep, your story is the one story. And it goes back to saying the truth. When we are forming an opinion about something, what usually helps is just say the truth. Like, I don't know this. Like, that's how I felt. Like, that's what I thought. And perhaps it was irrational. Perhaps it was not the best thing, but that's the best I could come up with in terms of explanation. And that is more believable than you're saying, well, I went to chess club and somehow I could never win. I'm like, okay, you're capping. This is not true. Like, what do you mean? It makes no sense. So I'm going to leave you to this one and let's just recap what we talked about. In order for someone to be a more influential thinker, they need to have a way of coming to an understanding and have a way to walk the listener through how that understanding came to be. The more you can give that to the people who are listening, the more influential you become because you can reveal that coherence because people feel coherence, and when they can go, well, that makes sense, it's naturally inviting that credibility factor in the way you express yourself. Now, if you're quantum leaping, suddenly the listener go, okay, but there's just something missing. And when there are things missing, people try to make it up with more promises and more bonuses and just making it enticing, when really it's just revealing and illuminating the process is what helps people understand how that came to be. And when it comes to ideas that you hear from someone and you think it's kind of cool, I want to urge you and to make sure you understand how that idea came to be. Not just because you cognitively understand. I want you to really understand. I'm going to leave you with this example. There are people who said this: when emotions are high, intellect is low. And it sounds really cool. It's like a throwaway line. You can put it on your fridge and a magnet, you feel really good about it. But when I heard that, it made me think, why? What happens? What happens in your brain that is true? And then I go into research and I understand that our prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for critical thinking, goes offline in the periods in which the emotional part, which is the amygdala, gets activated. Once that's getting activated, your access to critical thinking is non-existent. And what also happens is that because your fight-flight response is on, the blood flows to your legs and arms so you can run fast from the bear or the lion, whatever is chasing you. In the scenario, you're out. And another thing that is very interesting scientifically is that your BPM, your heart rate number per minute, goes up. And there are studies in which they were examining high performers, athletes, in what are the BPM rates in which they are high performing and what are the BPM rates where their brain starts to turn into mush and it's non-optimal anymore. And so because researchers detected that, and obviously when we are completely calm and we try to speak from there, it's just sometimes can be very boring. So having the energy up and running, sometimes excitement, nervousness can bump that up for you, so you can be more high performer state versus when you're super calm and chill by yourself. But if you go over a certain threshold, your brain starts to lose its coherence. And then first coherence goes out of the window. So logic goes out of the window. Coherent thinking in terms of formulating sentences it goes out of the window. And also memory at the end is out of the window. So you become a vegetable brain. That's what happens. So once you understand that, and then now if I feel like I'm in a situation where I'm in some sort of nervousness or there's something happening that makes me a little bit more agitated, I can recognize how my verbal expressions are not so finesse, not so finesse. I don't even know if that's a word. The finesse in my expressions is gone, and I go a little bit more to the point than giving you all the intricate things, the intricate ways of expressing, right? But that is already an emotionally charged moment, right? And recognizing that and regulating yourself or breathing into before you speak, because you know that your brain is going to be vegetable, it's ultimately going to help your prefrontal cortex to come back online so you can express from your deepest wisdom. And sometimes that takes time. So instead of grabbing that line that emotions are high, intellect are low, and just throwing it to people, I not only understand deeply on a scientific level of how that line came to be, I also have embodied experiences in which I recognized that I was kind of feeling triggered, and what that created in me, that awareness of just keep breathing, taking some space, coming back to baseline before I engage, because I know that at some point it will just stop making sense. So that's what I mean by having an opinion about something. I'm not just regurgitating scientific facts, because if you could argue that I am doing that, but I have an understanding because I ask myself, okay, why was that created in the first place? And perhaps the person who came up with it, they would have a different explanation that's true for them. But I made it mine. And I found the evidence, I researched it, I felt it in my body, and now it's something, if this is something that I wanted to say more, I could tell people what that experience has been for me. So it's not just a cute line that I heard on the internet, it's now became my line. If I wanted to, I didn't adopt it and I don't use it, but I have an understanding of how that came to be. Does that make sense? And so every single time when we embody something, when we hear something like, that's interesting, I wonder. That's interesting, I wonder. That's interesting, I wonder. That's my entire life. There is no things that come to me that I find interesting. I don't start wondering, and I don't start deconstructing the thing into its pieces and finding ways that applies in my life, not just then, but maybe later down the line. So it deepens that insight even more, and it upgrades it, and it makes it mine. So if you want to be more influential, I urge you to ask the question, how it came to be, I wonder, and just wonder more. Have more curiosity around these things. Alright, you guys, I'm gonna let you go. Thank you so much for listening to this one, and I'll see you guys very soon. Bye.